Yep. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are. What I'm going to do is basically talk about three things. I'm going to talk about the context, what IMSAR is, give a brief about Rwanda itself, and then sort of drill down to the assessment, what was the subject, and then sort of talk about our advantages and disadvantages of using that remote assessment, and sort of what are the key takeaways. So those are the three important things that I would like to sort of cover. So for those of you out there, Rwanda is part of the East Africa segment. It's a landlocked country. It's quite hilly. Before the COVID sort of struck, it was one of the rising stars in Africa in terms of economic growth. Agriculture is the main economic stay of the country. 50% of the labor force is engaged there. 50% of the 30% of the labor force is engaged there. 50% of the export comes from agriculture sector, being coffee and tea. So a large volume of sector of people are involved in agriculture. However, poverty rates are quite prevalent, and it's roughly about 40%. In 1994 there was this genocide, but since then Rwanda has moved markedly upwards, and they've done a great job. However, with the onset of COVID, like all parts of the world, the economy has struggled. So that's what IMSAR is. The program that I'm leading is a program that is supported by UK Aid. It's implemented by Palladium and SwissContact. IMSAR is actually an acronym. It stands for Improving Market Systems for Agriculture in Rwanda. And it has a local name called Nozo Isoko, which means better market. We started back in 2018, and we are supposed to end in 2022. That is 1 year from now. The goal of the program is basically, it's a market systems program, and we work in agriculture with certain defined space. It's like any MSc program. It's about poverty alleviation, but it also is about gender equality and social inclusion, which is the subject area of our discussion. The way the program is tracking, we're doing pretty good. We hope to be achieving all our program markers before the end of program. So in that sense, we're quite good. One of the areas that we've always struggled with is understanding how agricultural sort of content and information fits well with women and youth. That's one of the groups that we are interested to serve. And we've been trying to sort of tap into that by doing various forms of assessment. So, when sort of COVID came in, or just before COVID, we were talking with a content partner who had a strong presence with a certain content across the country. It partnered with the telcos, and it reached out to a large number of people. So it had a ready subscriber base. So what we did was we realized that this was a good source for us to sort of tap into to reach out to a large segment of people. And fortunately for us, the content partner was also interested to sort of answer these same questions for us. So it was ideal for us because that we could actually we turned this research into actually a partnership with they cost shared with us. So that helped us actually do some sort of economies of scale, because they cost shared, we cost shared, we could tap into their existing resources. So in total, going back, so the questions for us was about how do women and youth users relate to agricultural content? What sort of content do they need? What sort of information they want? What are the users? So we targeted users and users, and it followed sort of IVR as one of the ways that we could reach out to it, followed by FGDs. We intentionally targeted the FGDs afterwards because we wanted the findings of the IVR to feed into this process. To ensure data control and from an ethics point of view, we hired a third party to sort of go to make sure the confidentiality agreements between the users and us were respected. So in total, we did about 23 questions in the IVR, and it went to about roughly, and our target was to do about 1,000 samples of women and youth, 50%, 50%. We reached that target when we distributed to roughly about 4,000 respondents. And I'm now going to go a bit more into the details of it. So in total, we reached out to about 4,000 users, and then we got about 1,000 of them responding back to the questions. In total, it took about 3 to 4 minutes if you're a user to answer all the questions, because that's what we felt was a window that we could get. If we had more than that, we would have a higher dropout rates. And 23 was again a questions that the content provider felt that this was the maximum that we could ask. Initially, they were suggesting 16. So we went back and forth and we came up with the number of 23. Okay, and then we had to translate into the local language. So to make it easier.
Can I just interrupt you for a second, Shahroz bhai? It would be maybe good if you can just explain the tool a bit in case anybody's not familiar with use of IVR. So if you just explain like what the tool looks like. The integrated voice recording, because it's, I guess, like sending like voice.
So it's okay. So okay, you're going the technical stuff. So basically what we did was we came up with a questionnaire. The questionnaire was shared with the content provider, and they sort of converted that into a voice recording. So it went through a series of questions saying, we are asking this question from this company. We are trying to answer this question. So if you're ready, let's proceed, press 1. They would say press 1. So in this way, we asked a series of questions and each giving them response. So we asked the questions, for example, what are the sort of contents that you're interested in? And for example, they would say weather, land preparation, this seed. And so weather, press 1, land preparation, press 2. So users would then listen to it and then press the right number, and that would help us get the responses. So that's how the IVR technology is. It's basically a voice recorded message that goes out to all these users. Prior to the call, what the content provider did was they went through their subscribers list to come up with a sample list of youths and women to whom they were targeting. And that's how the voice call went in. Means there was no compensation or rewards being given to the respondents. It was mainly being said that we are trying to find this information for us. Please help us do this thing. So many opted out, many said yes, and that's how we got the responses. So as I was going back to earlier, we were about 23 questions. 47% of the respondents were women, 50% were youth, and the remaining were basically people just, male who are not youth. They were like in age bracket of 30, 35 plus. The question, as I was saying, was translated to the local language to make it easier for us to get the response, which is Kini Rwanda. Okay, so what are the advantages and disadvantages of using this method? The advantages was that, if I do a value for money analysis with a sample size of 1,000 and with the partnership that we had in place, it was quite economical. We could reach out to a large volume of sample across the country. And it was literally done in a very short time. Within a week, we got the response. Imagine if I was to do an in-person survey, that would require a lot of logistics, the cost would be high. So that was the obvious advantage of us doing that. We also felt that because it was the user who was doing the responses themselves, potentially that means the data quality is higher. You don't have the data error of the enumerator taking the wrong responses or others. You also, you still have to live with the fact that the user might have pressed the wrong button. But there's no way for us to know that. But if you take that aside, we felt that the user quality was better. The other advantage that sort of came out, and it sort of feeds back to what you were saying earlier, Novanita, was that trust issues. We used the content provider already in the market. So people were already aware that this content provider existed. So when we channeled the research through that content provider, we did not face the trust issues. It was easy for people to say, okay, we know we are your subscribers, you're using the service. So it makes sense. So for us, that was one way sort of we navigated to that constraint and how we get the response from that person. It allowed us to obviously reach a group of people when there were a lot of restriction in terms of, in movements and others. So that was the obvious advantage of you doing remote assessments. So that was some of the key advantage that came out. We were able to get the data very quickly, and it helped us design the FGD tool slightly better. But in retrospect, I felt that we could have done that a bit more. We could have done the data analysis a bit more so that the questions that we asked in those FGDs were a bit more probing. I think we missed that. If I were to switch to the disadvantages, I think it's again reflects back to what you were saying. We had very limited scope to triangulate the information. Agricultural content is a pretty vague area. So when you're trying to get information about that, and you're trying to get more, you don't have scope to ask repeat questions. If I was doing an in-person survey, you can ask questions in different forms, whereas here you don't have that scope. Obviously you don't have scope to ask open-ended questions. Why means essentially it was a what question. It wasn't a why question. We sort of again address that by having the FGDs later on. But if through a strictly speaking from an IVR point of view, it doesn't give you the why question. It just gives you a series of what, which you have to live with that. When we looked at the attrition rates, we had about a 30% dropout between question 5. There were 23 questions. So we took an arbitrary question number 5, and then question number 23, and we saw that there was a high attrition rate. So in the end, I think overall we hit a target of around 65% completion rate, which means okay. The attrition rate was higher in the towns and cities, which probably could be because people are more busy or they have more options or others, but that's one of the things that came out quite strongly. The other thing, although I don't have statistics to back, it's more of a hunch. The way the IVR was done was that it, if you press 1, it went to the next question. Mm-hmm. So we always felt that there might have been a bias for people to answer question number 1 and 2, because as you listen to the responses, you press 1, it goes to the next question. So it's not that. As I said, when you look at the response, there's a story to be told there. It makes sense. But there's also a fear that are people really saying this, or is it because they're more biased towards the first 2 questions, and that's how they're responding? I think that's a missed opportunity on our part, because the research firm that we had hired to sort of mine this didn't really look into the assessment of the remote tool. So means if we had done a study to see, look, okay, it means does these sort of things is being done, we didn't do those things. We also did not look into the data response in terms of demographics, besides this urban. So I think there's a certain missed opportunity. We could always go back to the data to really answer that question. But in terms of certain missed opportunities, I think we missed on that. We also felt that there were certain problems in terms of translation, because in English, when you ask this question and when you translate it to the local language, some of the meanings got lost. So we ended up with a finding like saying that the number 1 content that people require in agriculture is land preparation, and that was highlighted as a big finding. But when we got the data and said, what does land preparation really mean? Is it like seed? Is it like crop? Is it this? And again, we sort of went back to in the FGDs, and the question was, no, it's more about finding out when the weather is coming in or others. But I think when we did the question in English, it was much more precise. But when it came to the local language, there was a certain loss in translation impact. So in retrospect, I feel that this was a good tool for us to get us data when we wanted it. It helped us because we leveraged with a content provider. It helped us get a lot of good data, and we still have the raw data for us to analyze that information. But perhaps the topic itself, gender and youth, is more suited for a why sort of question rather than a what sort of question. So the choice of tool and the subject area perhaps wasn't the right mismatch as much as it should be. So those are some of the top line findings that I felt I could share with you.